Hi, everybody. Welcome. We still have some people coming in. My name is Tosca Lindberg, and I'm a coach with Shift Recovery, and I'm here with Tina, who is also a coach with Shift Recovery. Hi, Tina.
Morning, everybody. Morning, Tosca.
Good morning. So we are excited to, I'm going to stop sharing for a second. We are excited to bring this webinar to you. Between Tina and I, we have really spoken with and worked with hundreds and hundreds of food addicts around the world at this point, and we've come up with our top 5 mistakes that people make when coming into food addiction recovery, when dealing with food addiction, that prevent them from actually getting into stable long-term recovery. So we're really excited to bring you this topic. If you are watching the recording later, we will have links down in the show notes. We are going to drop some links to some free resources that Shift has, and also to the main program information of what Shift does to help food addicts. So we're excited for all of that. We will have some questions and answer time at the end, but Tina and I are first of all going to share our stories a little bit. So I'm going to go first. We're just going to share a brief bit of our story. So for me, I have been a food addict my entire life, I believe. When I think back on it, I started noticing that I was kind of different around food than other people at such a young age, like probably less than 10. I was just like, how can these kids not eat, like, what is this bowl of candy doing at this house? Like, how does that sit there? Like that just didn't happen at our house. If there was something to eat, we ate it. So I noticed that at a young age. By the time I was in college, I was calling myself a sugaraholic, and I used to kind of try to laugh it off, because what else do you do with these uncomfortable, like, noticings that, I would just lose control and just eat embarrassing amounts of things or steal from other people secretly, out of stuff that belongs to other people in the refrigerator, and you're just trying to take a little off of it so they don't notice, but then you keep going back and you can't stop yourself. So finding just losing complete control around food. But I was aware of that in my early 20s. I wasn't heavy though, but I was full of shame, and just my inner critic used to just beat the crap out of me. But the weight did finally start catching up to me when I was hitting around my 30s, and I started trying to do diets, which I was wildly unsuccessful at. I never was a good, we sometimes hear stories of food addicts who gain and lose. I was not good at the losing part. I just could not control myself. So that's how it was my 30s. I kept gaining and gaining. My high weight went up to about 270. I am 6 feet tall. And, I couldn't stop. And I'm a math teacher, and I could see the graph going up. I was gaining, and there was no stopping it, and I could not control myself. So I really was disheartened, like, to my core. I felt like I had no ability to control myself. And I was so grateful to walk into a 12-step room, 5 years ago, and hear my story being shared, and hear that I have a disease, that I'm not a bad person trying to be good, but I'm a sick person trying to get well. And I was just so relieved, even from that first meeting. And I've been able to be abstinent since then. I've got almost 5 years of abstinence. I got involved in working professionally. I found the InFact School, which is a school that trains people to be food addiction counselors. And I got involved because my life has been so completely flipped around by recovery, by working the 12 steps. not just that I lost 110 pounds and my weight has been stable for the last 5 years. My food is just easy and stable. My life is so different. So I really wanted to get involved in food addiction and helping because there's really nowhere in the world, not nowhere, but very, very few resources for people who need actual assistance getting abstinent, getting into recovery. And when I found Infact and then through them found Shift, I was so excited to be able to, command to get hired by Shift and have spent the last, coming up on 2 years, just being blown away by the work that happens at Shift. And I've been doing consults with people all these years, and it has been quite an experience. It's been amazing for me. I've learned so much, and it's been amazing to see the miracles and the transformations that happen at Shift all the time. So that's my story, and I'll pass it on over to Tina.
Thank you so much, Tosca, and good morning, everybody. So glad to be here. I'm going to talk a little bit about the physical allergy and the mental obsession. I was, I guess you would say, one of the lucky ones in a way, because I was a skinny kid and I don't remember at a very early age being obsessed with food. I could eat the proverbial one donut or 3 cookies and then go out and play. I did notice that when I had a lot of hormonal changes around the ages of 14 and 15, I began to overeat compulsively. And certain times during the month, I became fanatical or obsessed with getting sugar and felt like if I didn't have it right then, I was just, what was I going to do? People around me even noticed that my weight, not my weight, that my eating I went from being a normal eater to really shoveling in the food. And I did get some comments sometimes. I remember my brother saying, like, you're gonna have another bowl of cereal, like eating the whole box of cereal. Many food addicts can remember that. Now, it's kind of interesting, but my first encounter with Shift was in 1991. I found myself on a plane to Florida, checking into a hospital for food addiction called Glen Bay Hospital of Tampa. And when I got there, they presented me with the Acorn food plan and a spring-loaded scale. Hey, this is 1991. There was no internet access back then. It was just very, very basic. A spring-loaded scale, some plastic cups and spoons, and basically said, the decaf coffee is over there. You can have 6 sweeteners a day, or maybe it was unlimited sweeteners. I don't even remember. And we went to the cafeteria while we weighed and measured all our portions. And I was horrified. I was rebellious. I was angry, and I was detoxing. Nobody ever said, maybe you're so angry and cranky because you're detoxing from your addictive foods. I didn't really know that. I just thought I was an angry and cranky person. Well, of course I was, but take the food away and I was even angrier and crankier. But I did get detox there. And it would be nice to say that the story ends there and I've skipped along into abstinence ever since. Well, when that hospital closed, Shift was officially born. It was called Acorn back then, and that was in 1994. And I was a client off and on, but also kind of like a quasi-volunteer. So I had become very familiar with Phil Wardell and his theories. I guess I feel guilty admitting I didn't read. He wrote so much. He was a copious writer, and I never really read all that he wrote, but I felt like, he was a good friend, and I just, I heard him share all the time. I thought, well, that's just as good as reading all those books he wrote, but he really is a phenomenal writer, and I have his books, and he's deceased now, and I intend to go back and read some of them. Anyway, but as I was speaking with Tosca last night about the 5 common mistakes that people make that prevent long-term recovery, I could definitely identify myself in all of them, some of them more than others. Again, I first started weighing and measuring in 1991. I did have a long period of abstinence from, when was it? 1992 to 1999. And then I was off and on relapsing, like getting a year here and then relapsing. getting a year or 6 months and relapsing. So I'm also testimony. We're not really going to talk much about this today, but you hear around the 12-step rooms, it's much easier to stay abstinent than to get abstinent. I did learn that. I learned that it was murder trying to get abstinent. Not to say that it can't be done, that we can't come back from relapse, because we can. But what I believe for myself today, if I lost my emotional sobriety and I had to go back and I was just white knuckling my food, I would pray to God I would continue to white knuckle until I got back into emotional sobriety, because I was one of those people, I wasn't sure if I was going to get it back. So I hope that I value it today and will not gamble with it, even if it doesn't always feel good or it doesn't always feel like I'm really sober. Anyway, I am in recovery today, as a lot of us say, by the grace of a higher power and the power of community and fellowship, which we're also going to talk about today, and relatively free from the physical craving as well as the mental obsession with food that will kill me. So with that, I'll pass. Thank you.
Thank you, Tina. So good to hear your story and relate to it as much. I'm going to share my screen right now and jump into the material that we have for you guys. So let's see. There we go. Can you guys all see that? Yeah? Okay. All right. So before we talk about the top 5 mistakes that people make, we want to really take a good look at, and many of you might have seen this before, but if you haven't, this is really, really important. First of all, that addiction, and we're talking about food addiction, but all addiction is a 2-part disease. Okay, it's a disease. It's not something you're doing wrong or bad. It's just a disease, and it has 2 parts. It has a physical component and a mental component. So when you look at this, we call this the roundabout because it's a cycle. Can you see my little mouse moving here? Okay, so we're starting here on the mouth, like you ingest something that triggers you physically. Okay, and sometimes, one of the most confusing things about addiction is we don't always have this abnormal reaction. We sometimes just have a normal reaction and we think we're okay. But for many of us, we've experienced, if you're an addict, you've experienced the idea that, oh, I think I'm just going to have 1 cookie. That just never worked out for me. So 1 cookie triggers this abnormal reaction for me, because when I have flour or sugar, my dopamine response is way more extreme than a normal person's dopamine response. Okay, and that's just the way my brain works. It's like an allergic reaction. I mean, some people do actually use the word allergy to this, even though we kind of imagine hives or something, but this is a different kind of an allergy. So when we have an abnormal reaction, we develop the phenomenon of craving. All right, and once I have these cravings, I cannot stop. I cycle around in a binge cycle where I just, the foods that we eat, particularly the ultra processed foods, drive cravings. And we want to binge, and then as soon as we're kind of recovered from that binge, we want more. We're caught in this cycle over here. Now, many of you, if you've experienced this, somehow the painfulness of this cycle, we manage to break free from it. We call this the national anthem of food. Actually, they say we're singing the national anthem because we're like, I'm never going to do this again. I'm really going to stop. And this is when we start up that diet, start up that new plan, start up that exercise. I'm getting out of it. I'm not going to eat. And we hold for a while. We can kind of come out and break free from the physical side of this disease. But life is life. And, as an addict, this is actually the heart of our disease. We are restless, irritable, and discontent in the world. And so then we come to the mental side of this disease, where we have what we refer to as the emotional barometer. And, life is stressful. Even when life is exciting, these kind of emotions that fill our barometer here, we do not know how to handle them when they reach a certain boiling point. Okay. And we develop, so normally we have this willpower as a wall that really holds us off from picking back up our substance, like don't pick up that piece of cake. It's not going to help you. But at some point when our emotional barometer hits the boiling point, we develop what we call the mental obsession. And this mental obsession is a thought that can be completely irrational, but it sounds rational at the time. Like, oh, I'll just have one. I'll start again Monday. I deserve it. It's been a hard week. I mean, I have heard some very insane thoughts of people, and you might recognize them in yourself. I know someone who was like, oh, I'm on an airplane, so it doesn't count. I'm not, like, what country am I even in right now? It doesn't matter if I eat right now. I mean, that's just insanity. And it's a common, people, I've heard more than one person say that about airplanes. So it's something that pops in our head. So then once we develop this mental obsession, we absolutely are powerless to stop ourselves from picking back up. And once we pick up the substance, we're right back into the physical side. So this is the nature of the disease, and we really get cycled around and around. And in order for us to treat this disease, we need to treat both parts, okay? So for the physical component, the solution is to not get physically triggered. There's no way to not be an addict once you're an addict. There's no way to not be it. So an abstinent food plan is the answer to the physical triggering. On the mental side, what we really need is emotional sobriety. We've got to be able to deal with our emotions as they fill this emotional barometer. Okay, so these are the two parts, and you're going to hear me referring back to them as we talk about our top 5. All right. By the way, feel free to throw into the chat any questions that you have, and Tina will keep me posted if we have a good question. We will have questions at the end, but if you have something that goes right along with what we're doing right now, feel free to throw it up there. All right, here we go. Mistake number 1, not getting completely clear from physically triggering foods or food substances. Okay, so what we're talking about here, and I'm actually going to pop over to my famous slippery slope slide. This is not my concept, but I played with it a little bit. I've heard, people say if we're triggered, we're on the slippery slope. So what they're referring to is a little something like this. We've got, we talk about being like in the ditch where we're eating addictively. All right. On this slippery slope, there might be things like, okay, eating flour and sugar is pretty far down. If I eat some flour and sugar, I'm very liable to slide right into that ditch. Sweeteners may be something that slides people right down into that ditch. BLT stands for bites, licks, and tastes. Like, oh, I'm cooking, I've got to taste it. For many people, that's a slippery slope that slides us down. Many people cannot handle nuts, coffee, even avocados can be something that people cannot handle. So if you are a normal eater, I represent them as a 4-wheel drive truck, a normal eater, and you see these people, they can go, oh, I'm gonna eat, it's been a rough day, I'm gonna eat a bunch of stuff, and they can totally just eat addictively for a day or for a meal, and then just drive back up and get on this safe road here. That's not us if we're food addicts. We don't have 4-wheel drive. If we're an early stage food addict, we might be able to kind of hike up this hill. But once we get to being late stage, I represent us with, like, I think of myself as being in a wheelchair. I need to stay on the safe road. I cannot play around on the slippery slope. So these substances vary for different people. This is one thing that makes food addiction way harder than drugs or alcohol, because it's just easy to say, okay, with alcohol, just don't drink. You don't need to drink, just don't drink anything. But with food, we have to eat. And where do you draw the line? Some people, I know many people who are food addicts and who use sweeteners and who get away with it. I don't mean get away with it in a bad way. I mean, they're stable. And I know so many people who just didn't want to give up the sweeteners, and they don't find any peace. They don't find any peace. They don't want to give up the coffee. They don't want to give up the nuts. And they just don't find any peace. So what we have, this is the road for food freedom up here. This is what we call food freedom or food neutrality. And what happens is we see people sliding down the slope. And then they might fight their way back up and slide down. This is no way to live in peace. This is what we call white knuckling. Like, oh, I want my freedom, I want my coffee, I want my sweeteners, and we're sliding and eventually falling right back into addictive eating. And we don't. And that process might take a year, which is very confusing for people. They think, I tried it, I tried my best, but they didn't eliminate enough things to actually get free from the physical trigger. We have a physiological response in our brains, and it's not in our control. So you don't get to pick and choose what sets you off. It just happens. Tina, did you have anything to add on this?
Well, first of all, Tosca, I can't help but say this is brilliant. I don't think I've ever seen it in such detail.
Oh.
And I can say that I totally relate. The rigorous honesty piece that we talk about when it comes to the food, I think number one, never actually getting that abstinent food plan. I could point it out there, they never gave me something that works, but it's really not them. It was me. I had things going on that maybe I was aware of, maybe I wasn't in the beginning, but if something is renting space in my head, as a food addict, the last thing I want to do is talk about it. Like, well, then if I talk about it, they're going to take it away from me. So I might as well just keep it quiet, keep it to myself. That's actually the opposite of what I need to do. People that are familiar with Shift, which I'm assuming are a lot on this meeting, are familiar with that slip inventory. Like, I don't have to slip into the food or slip into a quote unquote, forbidden substance to write a slip inventory. Maybe I'm obsessed with, I don't know, I can't think because the shift food plan is, maybe there's something on the shift food plan that I'm eating every single day, every single meal because I love it. And I feel like if somebody wants to take it away from me, I'll probably just grab it right back out of their hand. That's a signal that I have something in the plan that may be triggering me that I need to look at. It doesn't necessarily mean that I need to cut out foods every single day until I'm eating only 4 safe foods. But it does mean that if something's up for me and renting space in my head, that the honest thing to do is, for me, it's usually best if I write about it because I tend to be more honest and less defensive when I'm writing. But if I can't write, I sure do need to talk about it and say, should I be having this every day? And should I be thinking about it and anticipating every meal? Am I really free if I'm looking at the clock going 90 minutes until lunch, 90 minutes until I can have that thing that's legal and safe and on my food plan? And I tend to exaggerate, so I probably overtalked, but the bottom line is the rigorous honesty plays into these little things that we might think, oh, they don't matter so much because they're legal. Thanks.
Yeah, and I was just thinking, one of my sponsees tried Ezekiel bread after she was nice and stable for a couple years. And she immediately, she didn't know how much to measure it. And when I gave her a measurement quantity, she immediately wanted to lie to me about it. And it just popped into her head, just lie. And she got scared. And she was like, I'm never having that Ezekiel bread again. Same kind of thing happened with me with French fries. I know many food addicts who have French fries. Nope, that does not work for me. That took way too much of my brain. And I only tried that when I was stable. When you're not stable, when you haven't gotten clear from the food, you won't know what's triggering you because you're kind of in a constant triggered cycle. So you need some stability. So it's best when we come in to shift, we really have people give up all of this right here. They don't have any of these things on the slippery slope for the beginning to make sure that we're clear from addictive substances. All right, let's move on to number 2, I think. We're moving on. Oops, click it in there. There we go. Mistake number 2, not eating enough. So a lot of people learn that flour and sugar is doesn't work for them, and even sweeteners, they might give those things up, but they struggle with the idea of getting like a food plan. You hear Tina and I referring to an abstinent food plan. Well, on the slippery slope, I represent the too restrictive side as being on this side of the slippery slope. And I've got, you know, we have intermittent fasting, we have diets that are calorie restrictive. And when we have these kind of things, if people are up on this side of the slippery slope, you cannot, this is the worst place for a food addict to be, because when we're calorie restrictive for over the long haul, our brains, it's actually the same part of your brain that like hold your breath. Like, how long can you hold your breath? Can you hold your breath till you pass out? At some point, you're going to change your mind and say, I need to breathe. The same exact thing is happening when we're holding our diet to a too restrictive diet. And eventually, your brain kicks in and says, we need to eat. And I can guarantee you, your brain's not like, we need to eat broccoli and healthy food. Your brain says, we need to get some calories. And we end up sliding right over this road and back down into the ditch down here. So being too restrictive is a common problem for people. And the answer to this really is to have a food plan. And so I've got this guardrail that I put down here that's made, to me, my guardrail is made of my food plan, which is weighed and measured, and plus my sponsor, because food is tricky and sometimes I need a sponsor to say yes or no when food goes bad, when things happen, when mistakes are made. So I actually have a food commitment that I make every day, and most of us who are in long-term recovery have a food commitment where I am eating this much protein, this much grain, this much fruit, whatever we're eating, whatever our food plan is, we commit to it. And we also have a scale. And believe it or not, the food plan and the scale, before I came in, I would have thought, this feels restrictive, this is too much. It's complete freedom. And it actually makes me eat enough. It makes me eat enough. I eat so much food, but I don't eat in between meals, right? So I know I eat the right amount of food because my weight is just stable. It's like a prescription for what I need. It's like a medical prescription. So I don't have to think about how much food to eat anymore. It's absolute freedom because that part of my brain is broken. So this is the structure that I need to keep me on this safe road to food freedom, is a food plan and a food commitment and scale. So these are the things that really, when people are coming into recovery, they just cannot. I certainly couldn't. I resisted it for over a year. I was like, no, I'm not that crazy. I don't need to weigh and measure. And I found out that I really did slide back into addictive eating, even though I wasn't eating flour and sugar. I slid right into eating a giant bowl of popcorn every single night with a ton of butter on it. It was very addictive. I didn't want to be doing it. And I couldn't stop myself. That's when I discovered I wasn't just a sugar addict, I was a food addict. So the scale and the food commitment keep me on the straight and narrow and in the freedom that I have. Anything to add to that, Tina?
No, Tosca, I think it was well said.
Okay. All right, we'll jump on to mistake number 3. Again, with the food plan, changing and adjusting your food plan. It's not easy for someone who's an addict to do a bunch of adjusting with food plans. It's really hard. So what can really, really help is just getting a food plan and keeping it stable. Now, the reason why, I'll take you back to the slippery slope here. I think this is going to work. Many people, when they come in, I certainly did, when I came into a food plan, I felt squished like this, like the road was too narrow. And I didn't like where the line was drawn. I just felt like, oh my gosh, this is too much. And I might have preferred my line to be drawn over here, you know. And we can do this kind of thing. We can just move this line around. wrong button. We can just move this line around anywhere we want. When we start moving the line around, we don't have a guardrail anymore, and we're just going to end up sliding right back into the ditch. Why do people move the line all the time? I'm going to stop share just for a second because we can just talk to you. Because I see that when people come in and do a lot of consults with me, I see that people are changing their plans for a couple of reasons. One of them would be because they're really focused on nutrition. And we see this all the time at Shift. The people who have the most trouble just leaving that line where it is, surrendering to whatever the food plan is, they are people who have a lot of knowledge about, I mean, they really do have a lot of knowledge about nutrition. And they know, oh, this would help, this food would help this, and this. They're paying attention to their body. It's all great stuff. The problem is that when we have addiction, that has to trump nutrition, because changing our food plan is just too hard for those of us who have addiction. Once we start negotiating with that, it's just that gray area, and we just start, like I just demonstrated, we just start moving it around. So what we do, I guess, and the other reason I would say people want to move their food plan, change their food plan around, is just purely out of addiction. Like, well, I see other people having this, so I want to be able to have it. And I see, some people have coffee, so I should be able to have coffee. Oh, that's a good idea. You're having this, so I should be able to have it. And somewhere, someone has to draw a line and say, no, this is your boundary. You need a line drawn, and it really needs to not be you doing the drawing of the line. Because I'll cheat myself. I'll cheat every time. I am not to be trusted. My addiction is not to be trusted. So when I come across, I asked my sponsor once, I was like, can I have grain if I swap it out for this? I sent her this long text. It was so long. And it wasn't, I swear it was not my addictive brain. I just had this reason. It would be so convenient and it would make sense. And she gave me a one-word reply. Nope. That's all she said was nope. And it took me, I was mad for about 20 seconds. And then I realized, there's the guardrail. I just bumped up against that guardrail and it's keeping me safe. What do I need to have grain at dinner when such and such and this and that happens? I don't. I've been doing just fine. Just leave that guardrail right where it is. So I was grateful, and I texted her and said, thank you for holding me to the line. But yeah, that was kind of a funny experience for me. Tina, do you have anything to add to this?
Just a couple of short things. I was told, I forget when, to keep my eyes on my own plate. And that really is good advice. It's a social norm to sort of look at somebody else, in the non-addictive world, or anyway, say, oh, that looks really good. What is that? How did you make that? Or even, can I have a taste before recovery? But in recovery, I try to keep my eye on my own plate. This is my prescription. This is what works for me. I'm somebody that has a lot of food sensitivities. I know in the nutrition world, they say, you're supposed to vary your food. And that's probably true. The reason that my food is not varied is because I have so many food sensitivities. I've found some things that work for me and I just eat them. Now, it might be healthier to vary it, but not at the risk of my abstinence. And one of the ways that I do take some supplements, I don't get carried away, but there's a couple of supplements I take and I think, well, if anything, this will help. But I totally agree with you. Abstinence has to come first. I can't, I mean, there's some very, very subtle situations, which is why I need a sponsor, because there have been health situations where I've needed a sponsor to say, like, how are we going to work through this health situation and stay abstinent? So in those situations, it's always best to get counsel. But in general, yes, my abstinence is not to be risked. So because I don't want to risk it. And I identified, what a great sponsor to just say nope, not be that people pleaser, not have a sponsor that's going to people please you. tell you what you want to hear, but somebody who's just going to say, no, that's not okay. So pass. Yeah, that's all.
Yeah, I so appreciate my sponsor who I know when things get dicey for one reason or another, I can just say, what do you want me to do? Like, oh, I forgot something, I'm somewhere else, there's nothing I can do. What do you want me to do? And I can just do that. And so I don't have to make the decision myself anymore. It's very relieving. I see a comment from Oslo. I like the approach that says this is my prescription. Yes, it feels like a medical prescription. And it was funny because I came home yesterday and put my dinner together fairly early. It was like 4:30 when I started eating it, and my sister was like, "Oh, you eat so early," and I'm like, "Well, I got a lot of stuff to do, but this is my number one priority, so I'm just going to get this job done right now and like be able to move on because I needed to make this power for this." So that's what I was doing last night. That's why I ate my dinner early, and it was fine. It was just fine. But that's my top priority is eat my prescription. Yeah. All right, back to sharing the screen, moving on. Okay, mistake number 4. We're kind of moving away from the physical side now. We've been kind of on the physical side where we're talking about the abstinence plan. Now we're talking about more on the emotional side, trying to do it alone. There's a lot of people that learn about let's switch to this slide. There's a lot of people who learn about, I was one of them who read Bright Line Eating book and learned about flour and sugar being addictive. And I was like, that makes so much sense. And there were lots of offerings of community and outreach and things suggested. And I was like, I don't need all that. I can do this on my own. And that's when I slid right into that popcorn addiction that I was telling you about earlier. You are invited to join us on what we call the well-worn path. You can see this path right here. This actually is a longer story I share sometimes, but this is a path to a mountain that I climbed. But when you see a path, people have been there. They've worn right through the grass and just there's a steady path going up. And we don't do well on our own, just traversing across the rough terrain. It's tough. I'm in a wheelchair. I don't do very well on my own. So we have tools, and this is why Shift is, I'm going to stop. Sometimes I like to just talk to you guys. This is why Shift is a huge part of Shift is helping people plug into the 12-step fellowships. There are meetings. If you've never done a 12-step fellowship before, I am blown away by the support that I get through my fellowship. Not only did I find my sponsor there, but I have so many friends that I've developed through outreach calls and through meetings. And what I found and what we've found, we collectively as people on this path, is that when we're off on our own, the addictive mind kicks in and gets us and takes us off track. When we stay together and help each other and reach out a hand to each other and give to each other, not just like take, but helping somebody else and giving helps me too, to stay on the path. And so the 12-step world is phenomenal. I feel like I have 24/7 access to support, outreach calls. I've got my sponsor who just is there for me when I need her. There's meetings. So now in the day and age of Zoom, you can get on a meeting there's so many 12-step programs out there. You can get on a meeting any time of day, anywhere in the world. There are meetings going on with true fellowship. And so when we see people on their own, they end up, like, oh, I was doing good for a while, but I slid right back into it. Tina, what do you have to share about your recovery program?
Well, exactly. I'm in a bad neighborhood when I'm alone inside my head. That's what I learned. And I make 4 phone calls a day, 1 to my sponsor and 3 outreach calls, and that's every single day. don't go to bed until that's done. I also wanted to put a plug in for the shift community. I'm one of the people that I lead the free Shift Strong meetings. We have them 4 times a week. And what always strikes me about those Shift Strong meetings, although they're an hour in length, we don't go hugely deep into people's issues. People are genuinely there and they genuinely want to help. It's sometimes I feel like it's even a deeper connection than in some of my other forums, because I sense that there's a camaraderie and a bond, and it doesn't matter if somebody's been around Shift for a while or if they saw us on the internet and they just popped in for that meeting. People are like really happy to share what they've gotten, and I use those folks to inspire me. I'm like, oh, wow, you gotta really, when you talk about the giving part, I just see our community as very giving and people willing to set aside their own stuff to help somebody else. And I know that's, all over in 12-step, but I think that's something that really is a plus for Shift, that sometimes I think we go over and above what can be offered in the 12 steps with the depth and breadth of our community.
Oh, for sure, for sure. I'm so glad you brought that up, because that is one of the links that I'm going to drop in at the end to one of the, these are the free resources that Shift offers. There's 4 times a week. There's Shift Strong meetings, and newcomers are welcome, very welcomed. And people share their phone numbers, and you can ask questions. And it's a sweet community. I love it when I'm leading it. I think I'm leading this Wednesday night. And it's just beautiful to see the connection between people. And it's just the beginning. People really, truly do make outreach calls and are not alone in this. So if you're a person out there that gets all the science and has learned all the stuff and has a good food plan, but you haven't yet decided, oh, I need to be a part of a community, this is your invitation. This is really one of the top 5 things that people cannot last in their own recovery without community. So you're welcome. Please check out your local 12-step meeting, check out our Shift Strong meetings, get connected, get plugged in. Okay. All right. Sharing screen again. And last one. We're doing good on time. Focusing on the symptoms or having a diet mentality. So this gets really tricky. Diet mentality. We have a line in program. We come for the vanity, but stay for the sanity. So many of us, we've just imagined that when we can get, this weight under, so I have a weight problem, or even if I have a food problem, if I can get this under control, then everything will be okay in my life. And it's not true at all. When we take a look at the disease, the symptoms of the disease, physical, so I've got addiction in the middle. Physical symptoms are just only a part of the symptoms that addiction brings into our life. Okay, so yeah, for those of us who are food addicts, the physical symptoms can include obesity. Not everyone who has food addiction is obese, and many people can even be underweight and struggle with that. And a lot of eating disorders can be paired up with food addiction, making it very hard to treat. So, physical is just one of the symptoms. I mean, we have mental symptoms. I mean, for me, I was so depressed, and I even had a period where I was suicidal, and I cried for a couple of years, very depressed. There are other mental issues that go on. Financial. I mean, many of us are. If you take a look at yourself, because the way we are with food, we can also be with spending. We can be spending addictively, and many of us are, because of our physical things, aren't working well. So we can have, I think that says work, stuff sitting on. Does it say work? I've got stuff sitting on top of it. We can have troubles at work because of our physical limitations. We might not be able to work, or we can just have work. We can actually have work addiction. Our addiction can come out and we can work compulsively to the point where we don't have a healthy balance in our life. We have spiritual ramifications, not being honest, not being the person that, like, my highest self that I want to be, not feeling connected to God. That's spiritual. Sometimes we have legal. This kind of goes along with drugs or alcohol a little better than it does with food, because driving and eating is still legal, although many people have actually been in accidents driving while eating. So that is a real thing. Relationships, I mean, for me, codependency has been a huge piece of my addiction. And I actually put the substance abuse on here just as a symptom. It's not the disease. That's what I really want to make clear. We're using the food to deal with the inner pain of that emotional barometer. So what happens is people want to treat these symptoms because this is where we're hurting. So we think, okay, I'll get on a diet so I can take care of myself physically. And I'll read a book about relationships and whip myself into shape over here. And maybe I'll, really look at my finances. So it's like whack-a-mole, where when we put down one thing, and a lot of people are cross addicted, they'll put down the food. And actually, more of the stories I've heard in my consults have been people who put down the alcohol and picked up the food. That's like Amanda's story too. She put down alcohol and drugs, and boy, did her weight just balloon right up. So it's whack-a-mole for us, unless we get to the heart and really treat our actual addiction. So trying to treat the symptoms is like having a diet mentality. We're not going to fix ourselves by treating the symptoms only. We talk at Shift about emotional sobriety a lot and what that really represents. And we talk about thought management. So we have a cycle. This is an addictive thinking cycle in a different, you can see this if you go on our social or our media page, and there's a bunch of different webinars. That Amanda did one with Vera Tarman called Lasting Sobriety. I think it talked about this. I stole this from that webinar. But this cycle right here, we talk about a lot when we are at Shift, because we absolutely have addictive thinking that drives painful emotions, that drives us to have an urge to stop that pain. And we take actions, and the kind of actions we take are picking up the food, picking up the spending. These are the things that we do, and they just keep us in the cycle because we're choosing such unhealthy things. And what we really have to learn to do is feel our feelings and accept reality. This is the kind of work. So this is what Shift is in. Shift deals with, because many people actually need professional therapy to deal with this. So if you come, Shift, the main thing Shift does is the intensive. And the intensive program is a week-long program. It can be 8 days. It's either in person or virtual. The very next one we have is in September, and it's a virtual intensive. And whether it's virtual or in person, it's the same program. It's very much a full day, like you're in therapy for like 8 hours a day, and you're together with a small group, like 10 to 12 people, doing the somatic process work, thought inquiry, interrupting this cycle right here. When we have that urge, noticing it, pausing, not taking the addictive action, but instead we really practice at these intensives, getting present, breathing, noticing feelings, checking in with our thinking. We teach something called thought inquiry. We use the 12 steps as a process, and we actually can break out of this cycle. So this is, this is some really deep work. The therapists that run these intensives are incredibly gifted and have been doing this for so many years, and we get to see miracles popping out of these programs time after time, with so many people getting into long-term recovery. and just learning how to deal with their food addiction. So the next step, and I'm gonna, here's, can I do all this at the same time? Yes, I think I can. I'm dropping into the chat right now the links that I promised. And I really do recommend that if you're a person who has not been able to break out of the addictive cycle, if you recognize yourself in there and you want to get some actual professional help doing that, that's what we're doing. We help people plug into the 12-step fellowships and get into long-term recovery. We have an abstinent food plan. We're the full package. We're not just a lightweight online program. We're kind of like the last house on the block for recovery. And trying to move forward here. So the other links in there besides the virtual intensive, I really cannot recommend more highly that you sign up for one of these free 30-minute consults. And you can click that link right now and pick a date and a time. And for those of you who are watching this recording later, the link is just down below. Please set up a consult. This is one-on-one with one of us coaches. And we really get to actually ask your history. This is how we've gotten these top 5, because I've talked to so many people, like, what have you done? Where have you been? And really kind of pin down what your next steps should be together. And then there's the free Shift Strong meetings. Please, you're welcome to come. I see a lot of people on here that are very familiar to me from the intensives and from the Shift Strong. Hi, everybody. And we also have the free Yale food addiction scale. So this is about a 10-minute, less than 10 minutes Google form where you click how frequently you're struggling with this or that, and it can really come back and tell you how severe your food addiction is, or if you don't have food addiction at all. So that's a very quick, easy thing. You can just click through it, and I have to score it and send you an email response. And that is the end of my slideshow. So at this point, did you have anything to add, Tina, before we take questions?
No, I thought it was tremendous. Thanks, Tosca.
Yeah, okay. So at this point, we do have time for some questions. So if anybody wants to, please remember I'm recording, so you're getting recorded, and you can, if you are shy and don't want to say them out loud, you can type them in the chat. But if you'd like to, raise your virtual hand, feel free, and we can take a few questions for a while. Maybe we answered all the questions and no one has any questions. That would not be good. I'm just assuming people are typing. All right, Joyce. Good morning, Joyce. Oh, you're muted still.
Makes me crazy. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Joyce.
Joyce, recovering compulsive food addict and a food addict. I just have a comment. Until I went to the Shift Intensive, I could not get abstinent. I was on the slippery slope. I was looking at the graphic, and I did all of those things. And what's made a tremendous difference for me is being away totally from my addictive substances, which is wheat, flour, sugar, nuts, coffee, sweetener, because I was dabbling with certain foods and it wasn't working. Now, I can't say that I was totally happy about this because I was really angry. I was really upset. And it took me a while, even after the intensive, to sort out my feelings. But I'm glad that I went. I've been in 12-step for over 30 years, but this is what really was the key to my attaining the level of abstinence and recovery that I have at this moment. So I'm really grateful for that. And I encourage people to either do the consultation or go to Shift or intensive in person, whatever. I did the in-person last November, and it's a great program. Thank you.
Thanks so much for sharing, Joyce. It was really good to see you.
You too.
Good to see you. Doris.
There we go. Yeah, could you talk about the importance of being involved in a 12-step program in addition to shift. I know that I've talked to people who felt like shift was sufficient, and there wasn't really, because we have a fellowship and although we're not a 12-step program, we do follow the 12 steps. So maybe you could help with that.
Yeah, I've heard Amanda talk about this, and I'll get Tina's take on it too, because she's got lots of years on top of me. But I've heard Amanda talk about this and talk about the fact that that shift is a business, and the fellowships are, just people supporting each other, and that we as shift people who have a certain level of recovery that we might not even see in some of the rooms that we go into, we can do service for these fellowships, and we really want to be out there serving and reaching people that are out in these rooms, just like Joyce just mentioned. She spent did she say 30 plus years out in the fellowships and couldn't quite get the level of stability that she needed. So thank God she heard about shift. And how did she do that? So for us to still be out there giving, not just taking, what I need, but we need to give too, is what I've heard Amanda talk about. You got anything to add to that, Tina?
Oh, wow. I had never thought about that question. I was around when shift started, and when we started, there wasn't really, it was like prior to internet and everything. So basically shift looked like this. People would go to an intensive, or they'd go to like a recharge weekend, and they'd be put on a mailing list, and we would get their contact information. But back then, there was no like real shift fellowship. There was no way to do it. People lived far away, and so that was it. It was just whenever an event took place. So our founders used to say, we recommend that everybody find a spiritual path that works for them. And they would say, our founders, because they were both in 12-step recovery, Phil and Mary, they would say, what works for us is the 12 steps. And what we do at Shift is get you familiar with step 1. So back then, after you left Shift, the only option was to do a 12-step program or to find another spiritual path. And they were both pretty open-minded. They said, if it's not 12 steps, just make sure you're on a path where you can get the support and structure that you need to stay abstinent and keep your emotional barometer, in check. So the landscape has considerably changed since 1994. I think that's like 30 years ago. So now, if somebody asked me and they said, I'm going to all this shift stuff, I go to the Shift Strong meetings, go to the alumni meetings, I have a sponsor, I'm doing the steps, I'm doing these events, and my life is such that I just don't have time for anything else, I would still probably encourage them to find a spiritual community that can support their food addiction. I'm not going to tell people you have to go to 12-step, because I don't know what everybody has to do. I know that I do. So I guess I feel like it's a case-by-case basis. I don't think it's an absolute. That might be contrary to others' beliefs, but that's okay. We're all allowed our own opinions. Thank you. I pass.
Thanks, Tina. That was a good question, Doris. Thanks for bringing that up. Toby.
Hi, good morning. My name is Toby, and I'm a food addict in the Boston area. What I'd like you to talk about is staying focused, because I'm moving to Florida in about a month. My mind is going all over the place, and I'm having trouble staying focused on God and meditating. Forget it. I try. I mean, my mind just won't stop. And being able to stop, I'm afraid that I'll start eating again because I'm all over the place. So can you say a little bit more? I mean, maybe it's my barometer that's filling up. Maybe that's what the problem is. I don't know. I'd like to hear some feedback.
Yeah, it sounds like you're, you know, what you're about to go through. I mean, it's a big deal, making a move like that. So yeah, naturally, that's going to fill your emotional barometer for sure. So, you know, what we say in program when we have things that are agitating us, we pause, we work a step 10. And I don't know, Toby, if you've ever read a book called The Golden Key, but it's a beautiful read. And I won't go too into it there, but you know, when it comes down to it, and when it's one day at a time, one moment at a time, one meal at a time, sometimes we are not, remember, this is not it's not a self-powered program. It's a higher power driven program. So you're not going to be able to fix this, whip yourself into shape. You're just going to accept where you are, what you're doing, and just control the things you can, which is weigh and measure your food, you know. And I know sometimes that's hard because I know your story a bit. Sometimes even doing that is beyond your control sometimes. But you're just doing it's serenity prayer, one day at a time. Do you have anything to add, Tina?
Yeah, I do. First of all, thanks, Toby. You are definitely, like I said, a model of how to show up and deal with, you know, life's curveballs that I don't feel like, yeah, sometimes I feel like some curveballs are much more challenging than others. But one thing I remember hearing in my 12-step rooms years ago, and I've heard it again recently, was it's not what I think and what I feel that matters so much. It's what I do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think being part of Shift, there's a lot of emphasis on thoughts and feelings. When we check in, you know, people give long lists of feelings and what am I thinking? But honestly, the bottom line is, what did I do today for my recovery? It doesn't matter if I felt like I had rage that could be at the level of a 10, or thoughts like, I'm just so done with this. Like, obviously, I don't want that to continue day after day after day. The bottom line is, right, I'm putting that food on the scale no matter what, as long as I have access to the food and a scale, which I realize in your case, it's been dicey at times. But beyond that, like even with the meditation, my mind can be so racy that this is the thought. Well, today I'm skipping it because I'm way too revved up to meditate. But the bottom line is, in my meditation practice, they say it doesn't matter if you sit there for 20, 30 minutes with my mind spinning out of control. The point is, I sat my butt down and I showed up. I showed up. And I feel like I have to learn that too. It's like, it's things in this program are not always completely line up. Like, for example, is it appropriate to be completely angry and upset with somebody and say, well, I hope you have a good day too. My day is good. It's in God's hands. Like, sometimes that's the appropriate thing to do, to not act out on those thoughts and those feelings, which are in my barometer. But I need to trust that that barometer is going to get taken care of eventually. But it might not be today. You may not have peace around the whole thing today, but can you show up and weigh and measure your food? Can you show up for your quiet time with your higher power? Can you show up to do your writing? Despite the fact that your thoughts and feelings may be way off the beam, they'll eventually come back. They'll eventually come back, but it may not be in the next 10 hours. You know, do I have that patience and trust to realize that I am going to regain my peace? I just don't know when. That's a hard thing. That's a hard thing to surrender to. Most people don't. Most people are going to act out before, you know, they say in the program, don't quit before 5 minutes before the miracle. Sometimes that miracle happens right after I take that first bite. It's like, why didn't I wait 5 more minutes? Because everything just resolved. You know, I've heard people say that too. So, you know, that's the gist of what I wanted to say about that. And I'm sorry it's so uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Toby. Thanks for bringing that up. We've got no more hands raised. Any last takers for questions? It's been great to have you guys, to see some of you guys that I know and love, and newcomers. And I hope that this message has been helpful to people. I hope that this, just knowing that these mistakes are out there, and that, you know, I don't know, I think I made just about every single one of them before I came into recovery. And so I thank God that I continued down the path and found a way to actually get some peace around my food and around my life, really, some emotional sobriety. So grateful for the work that Shift does. I've just been so blessed personally. And yeah, it's been great having you guys. So we'll wrap it up, and please look forward to the recording link, which you guys can share around, which should be emailed out shortly. And take care, everybody. And we will see you soon. Please book a consult if you're new here. Book a consult with one of us. Get that link, and we'll talk to you guys soon. All right. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you.